Hi, this is Privateer Station, and today we'll bring you an interview that Alexey Arestovych, advisor to the office of the President of Ukraine, Lieutenant Colonel, gave to Yulia Latynina, Russian investigative journalist who is currently obviously in exile. Enjoy. Good evening, this is Yulia Latynina and Alexey Arestovych, and I ask our viewers to subscribe to our channel, to share that stream and click likes and subscribe to Alexey Arestovych and to the Privateer Station if you are watching that in English. Alexey, good day. We just were discussing with him that he would not be able to be on Mark's show today, but thank you for finding an hour to visit us. Let's start maybe with the situation on the front. For the main part, the front has stabilized, and those small efforts that both sides are taking on different parts of it, they're tactical, they don't carry any significant meaning to us and to citizens, who live daily life. They do matter for troops on the front because they basically picking better positions from which they'll be defending, from which they'll be shooting down the opponent. So it matters for them. And most of those areas, in most of those areas, the fighting is done and these operations are done by the forces of one or two platoons. The only area that is really hot is Bakhmut. They're still continuing to push up to 8 waves per day, and we continue to destroy 8 advancing waves per day. And also Ugledar direction, down south. And that's a smaller front, that's 5 to 7 battalion tactical groups that are trying to push our troops further away from the railroad and the road that they use to supply their whole southern group. The funny part is that this is a strategically important part for them, but they managed to find basically 5, maybe tops 7 battalion tactical groups to achieve their goals. That reminds me of an old saying that the horse got really worn out by tough hills. So, yeah, they basically are failing. Mobilization did not resolve that problem that they had. They restocked some of the groups on the front with the mobilized forces. Formally, they have 170, so maybe 96,000 are on the war theater, and that's about 170 battalion tactical groups spread throughout Belarus, Belgrade, Eastern Front, Southern Front. So, in essence, mobilization did help a bit. Battalion was basically a formal structure at the end of the previous phase of war when they had only maybe 30% left. Now they have back to about 90, but they're still not capable of achieving any goal, any task, operative task on the front, because the growth of that battalion is artificial. These are people who don't know how to work on the battle line. And let's go back to Kherson. And what? Oh, yeah, everything is stable there. Sorry, I thought you may inject some thesis that I need to react. But it is also rather stable that there are small tactical actions happening, and we both are using some aviation, some artillery. They added 7 more battalion tactical groups, so they have about 32 total on that front in that area. It's very hard to miss for our artillery. And actually, the last of Russian airborne troops are there, and the better part of their war-capable units are in Kherson. Also, another piece, it's not news, the Russian army is experiencing hunger throughout the whole front line. They officially are being supplied only 90% of their daily rations. And we noticed they started to supply their ground infantry with food that is designated for the fleet, usually. Preserved fruit, preserved canned meals. It's a different set, and it's curious how did they manage to run out of food? The other question it poses is how do they feed those other 200,000 that are supposedly not on the front yet, that are somewhere in the training camps? So with all the picture, with the fourth or fifth grade shells that they're using, that they're trying to recondition to shoot, it's a topic of last week, but adding it to the problem with food, that gives you an interesting picture overall. Different. Yeah, they're in a very precarious situation. Oh, don't be shy. You can use these words you were thinking about. It's okay. I can use them with Mark. I'm trying to avoid using them when I'm talking with ladies. But okay, so yeah, that little fluffy animal, which in Russian sounds like an equivalent to foobar, is approaching them quietly on soft paws. So, unfortunately, we do not have much resources, much stock to push for another one or two Kharkov-like operations and happily acquire several thousand prisoners during the next offensive. So we need to store additional resources, and next month or two can be rather boring for the outside observer. But then when we will aggregate enough resources and we'll have facing us those mobilized troops that are hungry, cold, in claws of Ukrainian winter, it will be a very interesting operation, because after 2 months in steppes on lousy food rations, they will not be able to withstand our attacks. So it's not 1-2 weeks, it's 1-2 months, right? Possible. I am not entirely sure about all the details of support we're getting, but roughly with the tempos that looks right. It doesn't mean we'll stop our efforts in the meantime. We'll continue grinding them methodically, and perhaps in some part of the front, even before we get more resources, we will manage to push them to a level that they will start retreating, that they'll actually run themselves because of not being able to stand under fire. And we'll use it. That was one of my questions that I wanted you to talk about, or at least start talking about. So for several weeks, the front is rather quiet. No, I cannot say it's quiet. All right, the front doesn't move. That is probably a better descriptor. Yes, the front is stabilized. Although active actions are being done on about 900 kilometers, or roughly 560 miles, part of that front. There's a lot of shooting going on, it's just nobody moves. Okay, why? As I mentioned, both sides ran out of resources. Neither them nor us have enough resources to advance. All right, let me ask you a different question. So during that... oh yeah, this is called operative pause. Okay, sorry. On the military language, it's called operative pause. Sorry, we're trying to look into details of this war, but we're not real military experts, so thank you for helping with some of the vocabulary. During this military pause, operative pause, there is an interesting development going on. Position of Putin during these several weeks, while Ukrainian troops do not actually have enough steam to push forward, strategic position of Putin in the world map really changed. His stakes and his position is really crumbling. Perhaps let's start with grain deal. Today he has switched back and he's actually saying that they are supporting the grain deal and they're even eager to support hungry nations with Russian grain for free. It's, yeah, simple one, Yulia. According to the international orgs, about 100 million people are dependent upon stable, steady grain supplies from Ukraine. And now we have one dictator who's putting their survival near the question mark, and we also have them living in those countries that are on the northern part of Africa, who will be fleeing if situation changes, who will try to become refugees in Europe if it'll become real hard to survive in Africa. So I think one slap from Erdogan was enough for Putin to change his mind. Because while United Nations is mum about this matter, Erdogan is really in crosshairs if this deal fails, because he was a guarantor that grain will be continuing to come to consumers. So his one slap in Putin's direction did change Putin's stance in about a day. Oh yeah, that's good. And it also is not even just a grain, right? It's other allies that he had who are falling off from his crowd. Perhaps let's talk about this. So the stages of his fall could be described as follows. His attacks on the civilian infrastructure, they're not acceptable in the world. Why everybody is so tight about that? Because according to international law, genocide is an event to which every country needs to react. Not just can, but must react if they can. So those countries who would prefer to stay away out of that issue, they still need to react. And the countries in Putin's orbit, they also started thinking, well, one thing he is fighting in Ukraine, now he is also possibly peddling genocide, and we may be dragged into that, and we may face some repercussions, or if not courts, but maybe economic consequences. We are also doing logistics supply, we are selling, we're trading, we're perhaps trading some with Russia, and we're selling and trading stuff outside. And why are you storing shit so much? Money, like silence, do not draw extra attention to us here. So that caused, I think, many of them to reconsider their stance with Russia. And his withdrawal from the grain deal actually made Erdogan lose his face, at least for a few days. So that was a sort of blow below the waist. And whatever Erdogan talked to him about, Putin came back happy, smiling, and agreeable to many other things, and supporting grain deal again. So these actions that Putin's regime is doing, they are incompatible with the civilized approach of the 21st century. And China officially announced strategy of bipolar world. Funny as it sounds, but yeah, the world with two poles, where there is no real space for Putin's Russia. And they're not going to discuss the destinies of the world and sharing bigger areas of influence, which they also let him know about. India also is breaking relations with Russia. On the night from the 5th to the 6th of November, they'll slap an embargo. It's already written out. It just starts to work this week. And they're isolating themselves from Putin's energy resources, energy supplies. So he's facing a serious isolation in relation to supplies, in relation to oil. His grain is not being purchased much, his oil is not needed. So by February, I think he'll be in a very interesting condition, his regime. Okay, let's also take a look at Prigozhin. I think we do not appreciate these characters enough, or they are not getting enough limelight, because in essence they are his Dukes von Wagner and Duke of Chechen regions. So how do you think if Putin, who was eliminating all opposition methodically and steadily, he was destroying all possible civil opposition in the country, but somehow he missed the threat of the rise of his somewhat close dukes? Well, he did not really miss. I think he understood that, but his problem stems from him being... he's not brave. He's a coward. He, you know, there's a phenomenon in psychology. When somebody grows old, he continues to copy the behavior of those bullies who bullied him back in the day. So when he was little, he was probably afraid of people similar to Prigozhin and to Kadyrov, but he uses them as stimulants. So whenever he feels real down and uncertain, he regularly actually calls them up for meetings, and they basically pump him up. That, yeah, we'll show them, we'll kick their butt, we'll keep the front, we'll figure things out for you. And then for several days he starts to feel better. But then after that, they also address him and say, well, we will help you to take Bakhmut or take something else, but we need this, this, and this from you in terms of support. So if you want to look strong, you need to support us in this, this, and this matters. And finally, they succeeded. Finally, they succeeded in getting their preferential treatment. And Mark is saying that Kadyrov and Prigozhin are they're a bit lower on the Russian pecking order. They're probably at about 4th level, and one of them is the head of the private army, another is the head of the region, one of many in Russian Federation, and they both allow themselves to make statements on the federal level. We should mobilize the kids of oligarchs. The elites are not fighting in this war. Even in the most democratic countries, politicians do not guard anything so vehemently as their right to bring certain topics to discussion and define the general course. And all of a sudden, these two start to allow themselves to make statements at that level, at basically the first level of Russian power. And that only indicates that Putin's will is crumbling. He is crumbling as the personality psychologically. And those who he uses to stabilize himself, they get additional preferential treatment. And they afford themselves separate special behavior. So fragmentation of Russian power started with fragmentation of Putin's personality. And what is going on there politically is a mirror image of what's happening with his personality and his will and his common sense. Because we look at what we're fighting now. We're fighting with professional army, with mobilized army, with hired army, with army of inmates, with army of political subjects like Kadyrov. And then so we already have several armies, several political subjects, and after that we'll probably start seeing a proper division between army, leader, territory, and there'll be several of those within Russia. So my question, as I posed to Mark, whom will we be fighting in spring? Are we going to fight with several armies, and they will be bickering between each other? So you're saying that all that is stemming from psychology, and Prigozhin and Kadyrov are psychological projections of Putin. These are two people whom he really wanted to be. Yeah, absolutely. He absolutely wants to be like them, but he can't. What do you think it will conclude with? Do you think he'll be eaten by these figures? Well, he's done politically, and very soon likely he'll be done physically as well, because Russia never forgives their czars. It is not the first stage, it's the second stage of this fight, because the first one was under the carpet. Now that it's out in public, that's definitely a second stage. And they're defining the main players, the main zones, the main resources, and then they'll start affecting military processes as well, and so on. You did say that Ukrainian army cannot do aggressive offensive operations for the lack of equipment. What prevents Ukraine from doing these actions? What prevents the United States from supplying more armor to Ukraine? I talked to Michael Podolyak just a few days ago, and he said that if United States supplied Ukraine with 200 howitzers, the war should be over in under 4 months. What do you think precludes them? What do you think paces them at that current rate? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. It's all hypothesis. I don't know a single person who has an answer to that. Why the supply tempo is so low. And I have my personal theory. I'm thinking that 70% of that comes from things they don't have. They are not ready to transfer. They don't have access of. And 30% is psychological, that they were considering that Putin will probably fall by 2024, when the next elections will happen in Russia. I don't know whom they consider to be his opposition at that time or his opponent, but they were expecting that the power will transfer 2 years from now. And now they're facing a situation that he likely will not survive next year as a politician, and the world starts to change areas of influence and areas of power. And America is losing control over many processes in the world. There is India, there is China, there is Turkey, and this really concerns them. They need to change their strategic plans, and it takes time. And at that moment, it makes it much more difficult to share lavishly in military equipment, because that definitely will affect the situation on the front and may continue to more changes that they're not ready for. So I'm expecting there probably will be these elections in November. After that, their deep state and military deep state will probably sit down, rethink situation for a bit, and a month later they will come back and either continue their current line or radically improve it and maybe add new items to the assortment. And right now they're somewhere in a condition of not understanding where is that situation going to. They're also, I think, very surprised by the growing activity of Europe. Their independent game that Europe started to play, I don't think America expected that. Not only in military support that Europe started to providing. From a European point of view, this is a crisis. From our point of view, this is war. And you could even refer to the article of Steinmeier, who is one of the key players. Germany is a key player in Europe, who posed a question of returning Europe, returning EU to the big geopolitics. Who actually, it was very clear in his speech that they cannot rely on America's support in conflicts. And many people did not pay enough attention to that, but this is a colossal tectonic change in the politics of Europe, in the politics of the West. Americans are too slow, they're not catching up with all that unfolding. They're a little stuck in their internal agenda, I think. And I think they thought Pelosi's visit to Taiwan and their current supplies to Ukraine were providing for their stable position. And now everything is changing again. So they may be considering now that what happens? Okay, we give Ukraine a lot of weapons. They probably finish war by February, March. Russia perhaps will go into some state of decline or maybe a civil war. Are we even ready to that eventuality? And that may be a subjective position, according to my hypothesis, that they are internally debating. Can one expect from that heightened activity of Europe? Can Ukraine expect that Europe will be supplying Ukraine with more weapons? Will it provide for some competition between two suitors to the bride? Where both European Union and United States will try to struggle between each other and figure who has better influence on Ukraine. Perhaps Europe indeed is activating their support from any direction. It's money, it's financial, it's energy, it's food supplies, it's weapons. But perspectives of competing with Europe in terms of volume, they're really facing that. Now that France joined European Union and Great Britain, Macron talked yesterday, they're adding economic package, air defense systems, more weapons. So these are big tectonic changes in Europe indeed, and I think Americans are slowing behind. They probably are cautious about throwing more means into that conflict that may change it even more rapidly than the current changes that they're already falling behind. And that's my theory. This is not. This is just Alexey Arestovych personal opinion. This is not my official view as an advisor. Do not quote me. There is another look at that. In Russia, they're peddling a view that Russia actually scared the United States to a degree that the United States do not want to be too active. They want to be careful because of Russian threats to use nukes. According to some data, then Russia actually discussed a couple of months ago where and how to use tactical nukes on the front. Do you think when that data leaked to media, Americans reconsidered their active position? Americans are not afraid, in my opinion, of tactical nukes use on the front. And frankly, if you are doing war, that is on the table. There are many of weapons are on the table. But I'm not even thinking America is the main holding force for Russia in terms of nukes, because China voiced their opinion that China is vehemently against Russia using anything nuclear on the front, and they're a much stronger influence on this war theater than United States in this regard. At the same time, I don't think Americans are really afraid of Russian threats to a degree that they actually deployed 101st Brigade, and for the first time in the last 80 years. So I don't think they're afraid by when they do actions like that, when they deploy their active troops on the borders with near Russia. Also, I'm under impression that Ukraine is the main sponsor of bravery in the world, that helped Europeans to not be afraid and Americans to not be afraid, because Russia was adding more and more suspense to the situation until those people who smoke in wrong places from Ukraine all of a sudden started causing different catastrophes here and there. That Crimean bridge, some targets in Crimea, military targets there, other military targets on the Russian territory that keep experiencing fires. So that's, I think, what summarily, even during that operative pause on the front, led to a lot of tectonic changes. And I'm referring to Crimean Bridge, to helicopters burning deep in Russia, to airplanes exploding in Kaluga. So I think that those people who were so lucky smoking in the wrong places, they actually provided for the change of that strategic situation by demonstrating the worthlessness of Putin's regime. I think that the causes of that are that Putin picked a strategic behavior that is unsustainable. Look, Iskanders, they're maybe at 13% left. Ha missiles, they have maybe 45%, even less. Calibers is only at about 35% resource. 30% is the red line. 30% should be there for the last-ditch effort in case Russia faces the war for survival. And look, the recent barrage they sent 50, we shoot down 44. Okay, how many more volleys can they send at Ukraine like that? 10? 10 more? Okay. They will not be able to bury our energy systems. And I would explain why, because back in '99, NATO was working on Yugoslavia, a much smaller country, which had very little in terms of air support or anti-air defense. That's basically about the size of Kievska and one more region in Ukraine. And they failed to destroy Yugoslavia's electric grid effectively to a degree that it will not be recoverable. They could not stop their infrastructure, and they were hitting electric stations, they were hitting any military factory, any military target. But Yugoslavia still managed to continue working, to continue providing electricity, and to continue supplying their military machine during that time. So Russia is aspiring to achieve the same goals on the country that is times bigger than Yugoslavia, and it is a questionable proposition even to start with. So look, the first time they tried to attack our energy systems, they hit water heating plants, failed to. Second time they tried to attack electric stations, mostly failed. Third time they could not hit nuclear plants, but they were hitting the transformers and other parts of that grid, and failed again. And interestingly, their second volley, they did not make it according to the plan. They actually tied it to the explosion on the bridge. So they combined both together. They combined that they mixed the plan with the media cause. I would say that they're lacking resources at the point to the level that they have to combine these efforts. They cannot follow the planned destruction of our grid or attempts to destroy that with reaction to extra curriculum activities. So yeah, they're at a point where they only can threaten and scream out words that Ukraine will stay without power for the winter, but I predict that'll fail. Not a single military operation can succeed if you lose more than 70% of your military aims. They launch a volley, they lose most of it, they lose north of 70%, and they don't achieve much. Well, they can do maybe 5 or 8 more volleys, and we'll sit maybe a couple more hours without light during the day, without electricity during the day, but it will not change our war. We will not cease fighting. We will be fighting rather fiercely as a result. And at the same time, Russian troops don't have much to eat on the front. They lack the essential supplies. Also, yesterday's statement by one of the Turks said that how are they going to blockade Ukraine? They need a fleet to blockade Ukraine, and no, we control the Black Sea. And they also lack cadre military. They don't have full personnel for full staff on those ships that are left in Crimea. That Turkish military expert was laughing and basically pointing at the reasons why Russia will not be able to provide any blockade effort to Ukraine in the sea. And of course, the world is also reacting to that because Putin created such a suspense that created a threat. And then all of a sudden, they realize that he lacks resources to do that. And then your own lackeys, your own projections of your personality are starting to eat you alive. So, if Prigozhin and Kadyrov are these projections of what Putin really would want to be, what does it say about his psychology that he is using these big phallic missile symbols and real missiles to destroy Ukrainian infrastructure, to try to attack structure that was built by Soviet Union in excess, expecting probably a third war with nukes flying in different directions with extra capacity to withstand direct hits. And also adding gas blackmail. What do you mean by gas blackmail? This is a peculiar story. This is a very interesting one. Since about 2005, he was talking internally that Russia is a superpower in terms of natural gas. And his propaganda started talking about that for the first time, that the whole world is dependent on Russian natural gas. Because when I was reading economy books, I never ran into the word of great gas superpower. I read the words of natural resources, or resource-rich territory. I actually want to draw some parallels between that and another country that we know as Congo, that was actually supplying a lot of resources. So they were supplying, specific of them was coltan mineral that was used for microelectronics in electronics building. So in the 90s, in early 2000s, there was a very popular theme that international corporations are creating a civil war in Congo to get their hands on the resources of that mineral, to try to pipe all these minerals from the country. And of course, in reality, everything was mined in Congo in pretty horrible conditions because local military was used to make people mining these minerals. And they're basically in the conditions of the Bronze Age, were digging for these minerals, and they were giving them for pennies to people with machine guns, and people with machine guns on this money afforded themselves to keep the whole country prisoners. And at some point, corporations decided to spit on those participants of civil war, and the ones who were actually practicing cannibalism, poor pygmies were the victims of that, and some monkeys were victims of that weird tradition. So big industrial corporations said, to hell with you, and decided to build computers from resources from other places, other countries. And since then, the great resource power of Congo disappeared from the economic playing field. And it turned out that world economy can survive without coltan, but Congo and their economy cannot if Europe, Asia, and America turn away from them. Without the world market where they can sell that resource, they will not be able to survive. because they cannot build electronics. Sorry for that winded story, but yeah, this is true. And Yulia, Putin didn't serve in military. He doesn't know the basic military wisdom. If you spit at the group will wipe their faces. But if the group spits at you, you'll drown. So he spat at the collective group on this planet. Last question. For 2 days, you and Mark were discussing that idiotic resolution that was taken by United Nations and the Security Council against Israel that prohibits, or theoretically is supposed to prohibit, Israel owning nuclear weapons, which supposedly they have, and that is a pointless resolution where Ukraine voted with different countries, including Russia, together to put their voice against Israel potentially having nukes. I know your position on this matter, and I have a peculiar question. That idiot who voted for that, is he going to be fired or not? Kislitsa? No, I don't think he will be. He's an experienced diplomat who has been punning Russia and their endeavors in United Nations. And I think what happened there was not an act of evil. It was an act of continuing inertia. We are probably too engulfed in matters of war that we just, that resolution flew under the radar. We voted like that for 30 years, and we just randomly decided to continue doing it the same way, without consideration for current changed situation. And now, yeah, it was a stupid decision. The next question is, was he indeed guilty of evil goals, or did he think how to? So, and the question is not so much as what did he do, what happened there, but in what will be the outcome of it. Will we be able to explain it, that there was no evil intent behind it? And I think we will, yeah. I think we just said that we're dumb. We officially acknowledge that, sorry, we are full of inertia and sometimes we're dumb. We need to correct that. So at that time, we voted just like we did 20 years before. This is idiotic diplomatic social inertia that pervades different parts of society. And punishing a person who is rather successful in that position otherwise, I don't know. I wouldn't be taking that decision. It's not in my purview. But he's pretty successful in trolling a Russian diplomat in the United Nations, so maybe just for that deserves to stay. How is your flu, Alexey? A little better, but it's getting hard to talk, especially later at night after talking the whole day, and my throat still hurts, so sorry if I sounded awkward. I tried to partake in our conversation by bringing up the Kaltan story and maybe talking a little bit for you. I hope our viewers will provide additional moral support, leave good comments, wishes for Alexey, and see you in a week. I hope we'll tag next week again. Thank you, Alexey, very much, and thank you too, Yulia. See you later.